Welcome to the I Teach Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 30. What can shapes teach us about building a computer? So, building a computer, it's totally a thing. If you didn't know you could do it, you can do it. You can do it. Bob the Builder says you can. So, with building a computer and shapes, really the biggest thing you need to remember about with building a computer is that everything fits together like shapes, because the square peg goes in the square hole. The round peg goes in the round hole. It's really just that easy. One of the things that very early on you discover with IT is that people seem to be incapable of understanding very basic things like that. You start putting together a computer, people go, "Oh, this is magic. It's witchcraft. How were you able to understand which components go where?" And honestly, it's just making sure that the shapes fit in the shapes. That's it, guys. Like, that's the podcast. Anyway, there's a little bit more to it than that. When building a computer, there are a few pieces of information that you do need to understand. One, you do need to understand what you're building the computer for. So, if you're building a gaming PC, you'll want a specific type of processor and graphics card. With a office or workstation PC, you're going to want a very specific type of RAM. It just depends on your use case and exactly what kind of computer you want. And the other thing you want to consider is how long you think your computer will last, how long you think that you'll need to have this device before you'll need to replace it. And in the realm of computers, a really easy and simple method to understand that, if you're going with like an Intel chipset, is to understand that currently with the core infrastructure that they have set up, that's Core i3, Core i5, Core i7, Core i9, that core number can almost be directly related to the number of years that you will be able to, the maximum number of years that computer will be viable before you have to replace it. Because the processor does play a big part in that. But it's not the only consideration. Your computer also relies on the RAM. And a lot of systems, if you have a low RAM count, your stuff will run slow, or it won't run at all. I believe Windows now requires a minimum of 4 gigs, although I would never install Windows on anything less than having 8 gigs of RAM. And if you're going to be using it for daily use, I probably would never install it with anything less than 16. That's just where we live. Chrome by itself can take up 4 gigs of RAM and never give it back while you have it open. So there's a lot of considerations that you have to do when building a computer. How much RAM do you want to have? And there are online retail organizations that have little calculators and things like that that'll help you understand what components that you might want to build a computer with. But you do need to understand that if you cheap out on your components, that is going to lower your ability to do things. I remember way back when, and I know I'm going to age myself here, date myself, but e-machines used to be a huge thing back in the late 90s, early era of the internet. And you could go and buy an e-machines for like $300. And people would buy those machines and then call me and ask, "Well, why isn't my machine working very well? It's really slow. I just bought it. It's a new computer." And yeah, even though it's really new, does not a fully functional fast machine make. You have to understand that there are the background components to your computer have a lot to do with the functionality and the ability for your system to operate. And yes, eventually your computer can become slow because it has viruses or things like that, but that's not typically what happens. Your computer just becomes slow over time because as your applications and operating system update, they add features that run in the background that will slow your machine down if it doesn't have the appropriate amount of CPU or hardware available. On top of that, there is such a thing as a slow death by misuse. So if you have a computer that continually runs hot and you shut it down improperly, unplug it, trip over the power cord constantly, are basically torturing this device with powering it on and powering it off, that can have a detrimental impact to the functionality of your device. And so when you're out there trying to build a machine, you need to kind of keep all of these things in mind. How are you going to use the machine? Are you going to be turning it off and on all the time? A lot of these considerations have to be put into perspective. And you can absolutely plan through all of these eventualities and all these understandings. You just kind of have to have an idea before you go out and start buying components. What you don't want to do is you don't want to spend $1,000 on a processor and then cheap out on RAM just so that you save a few bucks here and there. If you're going to spend a bunch of money on a specific component, you want to make sure that you spend money everywhere so that you can fully utilize that component. On top of that, there are considerations to where you store your data. If you buy a fast fucking processor and you have the best video card in the whole fucking world and you got all the RAM, if you buy a spinning disk hard drive, your computer will be slow. No ifs, ands, or buts. Your computer just can't pull the data off the hard drive at any speed. And so your computer will just run slow as shit. It will be as slow as it possibly fucking can. And it's fucking Alexa. I apologize. My Alexa's engagement phrase is computer. And every time I say this, it turns on. So anyway, with your computer, you want to make sure that you have your hard drive functional at least the same level as the other components. If you buy a spinning disk hard drive, that is going to slow down your system. You want a drive that absolutely operates at the same rate or a similar rate as to the rest of your computer. So an NVMe or solid state drive or whatever the future equivalent is, you'll want to make sure you have that purchased and put into your system, because a big contributor to the slowness of a machine is actually the speed of the hard drive. Moving on from there, laptops are another consideration. Now, you're not really going to be able to build your own laptop, though there are some vendors out there or some manufacturers out there that are trying to make componentized laptops a thing. But if you're going out and buying a laptop, you can apply these same kind of ideas to this. When you're buying a computer at any point, even if it's one that you're building yourself or one that you are buying that is prefabbed, you want to look at the data, at the components that are internal to that system. And so the first thing you need to look at is the processor, because that will tell you how long your computer will last. The core number on the processor, again, if it's Intel, Core i7, Core i5, Core i9, that'll give you a general idea of the maximum number of years that the processor will last. Same thing with the Ryzen number. So if you have an AMD processor and it's a Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, Ryzen 9, that's also a really good indicator of how long that processor will probably last, the maximum expected lifetime of that processor. So processor is one, RAM is number two. You want to look at how fast the RAM is in comparison to the processor. They have a DDR rating that is typically listed. The higher the number, the better. And you want that RAM to be, you want the RAM operational level to be at least as fast as your processor. So if your processor is 3.9 gigahertz, you'll want something that operates at least 3900 megahertz. But faster is better with that RAM. The next thing you want to look at is your drive, the primary drive that is installed with the computer. If it says 7200 RPM, then it is a spinning disk and you want to throw that drive away. You don't want that drive. You'll want to go and buy an NVMe or a solid state. You'll want to make sure that there is an NVMe or solid state in your system if you want it to be fast. If you don't care about fast, all you want is big storage space, solid spinning disk is the way to go. It's the cheapest way. I think for the same price as buying a 4 terabyte SSD, you can buy a 16 terabyte spinning disk right now, today. That'll change, obviously, later as my podcast ages terribly, but that's kind of the equivalent right now. And so looking at those, you can get kind of an idea of what you want to spend. And again, if you're buying a computer to do specific things like gaming, or you're buying it to browse the internet, then your requirements are going to change. I would advise never ever buy anything below an i5 or a Ryzen 5, simply for the fact that you're really not going to be able to do too much else other than run just the operating system with an i3. I mean, unless you're using Linux or you desire the torture that a slow system gives you, an i7 would just really do nothing for you. Now, if you're using your computer as essentially a thin client, which is effectively you're using this to access another computer that has speed, an i3 might be okay for you. It's one of the things we suggest when we have clients who are cheap and they don't want to buy all of their employees' computer or hardware. They buy an i3, we turn it into a kiosk mode, and all they're able to do is use it to remote into the server, the session host server that the company houses. So there are considerations and places to use i3, but if you're using it as a daily driver and it's the direct system that you're using, I would not suggest using that normally. There's like Core 2 Duo, there's a dozen other processor types out there, and yeah, just don't do it. And so the other total possibility that you can do while listening to this, and you could absolutely be like, well, that sounds like a lot of fucking work. I don't want to do that. I'll just buy a Mac. And I have to say, as an IT person, if you buy a Mac and expect to use it in a business environment, be prepared to not have it supported by anyone anywhere ever. Macs are generated so that the user really has total control, and so that you really do have to know what you are doing with the Mac. Now, that's not to say that you can't support a Mac remotely, but the way that the iOS or Mac OS is generated is that it kind of expects the only person to be touching that computer is the primary user or users. That there's not going to be somebody who needs to get into it to service that system. That is kind of the assumption by Apple. And so I would not suggest that Macs ever be used in an enterprise environment in this age. Now, Macs might change their abilities and functionalities in the future, but as we stand right now, they don't really allow for the level of control and support that is necessary for the simple things like I can't print, or I can't open up my browser, or I can't find this file. It makes all of that much more difficult than a PC. So for the sanity of your IT team, please do not insist on a Mac. But if you're using a computer by yourself, you find that PCs are too hard to understand and you just want to buy it and forget it, and or you like the status symbol of a Mac, then yeah, go ahead and fucking buy one and don't bother me with your fucking questions. My wife owns a Mac, so I'm really happy I don't have to support her. Beyond that, The other things that you might consider is just that, it's too difficult, and I just want to trust that I'm buying the best computer that I can. And so how do I do that? How do I just go and buy I don't want to build a computer. I just want to buy one. How do I make sure? Again, it's just look at the specs and try to understand what those specs mean. Those numbers actually do mean things. The numbers that are attached to the specs actually do mean things. And if you are really concerned that, hey, I'm buying a computer and I'm not entirely sure how good this computer is, then just Google the specs and try to understand that. And do remember that you get what you pay for. If you are buying a computer that is $230, be prepared for it to not do much. It's just kind of what it is. I mean, that is a fact. Now, if you do go out and buy a computer, or if you do go out and buy something prefab, do remember that the manufacturer, almost every manufacturer, throws all of their shit on that computer. They have their own bloatware, their own applications, their own antivirus, all their ad shit. It's how they supplement their income by selling their new computers with shareware data or shareware applications that their users are kind of tricked into buying. If you're buying a new computer, I 100% suggest that you wipe that operating system and install a new operating system without any other applications on it before you start using that computer. That's the first step you do when buying a new computer, is uninstall that operating system and put your own copy of Windows, because you can go and download it. You can go download Windows for free from Microsoft and put it onto a thumb drive. They have a whole utility that allow you to do that. It's really just a one-click install, and then you install it on your computer. Do that by yourself. Do yourself a favor. Get outside of the vendor installed software, for the simple fact that even if a vendor isn't outrightly malicious, all of their software is just stuff to slow your computer down. But there are manufacturers out there, and I won't list them for fear of getting sued, that have been caught installing malware onto computers as part of the base OS. And so to avoid that circumstance, to avoid that type of environment where you have malware that is latent on a machine when you first got it, I would reinstall the operating system no matter where you got the computer, if you bought it or if you made it yourself. So, all that being said, once you get a computer, once you put everything together, once you have all the shapes connected, and you first turn it on, it is important to also understand that your computer is only going to run as well as you operate it. Computers really only ever do what you tell them. There are certain things that can happen on a system where you are less in control, spyware, malware, that sort of thing. But in totality, a computer really only ever does exactly what you tell it to do. And Alexa, if you turn on one more goddamn time, I'm going to throw you out the window. Because my Alexa, again, its engagement phrase is computer, and it's doing exactly what I told it to do, but being a bit of a bitch. Anyway, where was I? When you are operating a system, you have to remember that it only does exactly what you tell it to do. And if you buy a computer and you start operating it and you're like, it's not doing what I tell it to do, it's got a mind of its own, you might look at the things that you've done. Now, if you're so incapable of understanding what you've done to a computer, maybe you do need just an in-house IT person. Maybe you do need somebody who can tell you exactly how you got to that point. For instance, I have a doctor's office who operates a few surgery centers. And as part of this, they have multiple mice that exist on the computer, because while they're operating, they have to move this camera around that's attached to this computer. And so they have a mouse inside of the operating room, and they have a mouse at the nurse's station, which is just outside the operating room. And one day they called in and they were upset because their computer was doing things that they didn't expect. The mouse is clicking and the mouse is moving by itself. And that was because they had two mice connected to it. And surprise, surprise, one of them was freaking out and the other one wasn't. So again, remember that your computer really only does what you tell it to do. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day.